Taiwan's defense minister says military tensions with China are at their worst in more than 40 years. Chiu Kuo-cheng has told a parliamentary committee that the situation is urgent and serious. He has also warned against the risk of a misfire in the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan says dozens of Chinese aircraft have entered its airspace over the past several days amid the tensions. U.S. President Joe Biden said he had discussed the issue with his Chinese counterpart. Biden said Beijing and Washington agreed to abide by the Taiwan Agreement, referring to the policy under which nearly all countries recognize China's sovereignty over Taiwan. However, Beijing condemns the expanding U.S. ties with Taiwan and the weapons sales to the island as a violation of its sovereignty. Author and historian Marcus Papadopoulos is joining us from Pembrokeshire, UK. Sir, welcome to the program. Let's quickly go over first the comments coming from the Taiwan defense minister stating that the military tensions with China are at their worst in more than 40 years. What's changed over the past 4 decades?
Well, please allow me to clarify the actual status of Taiwan by dispelling the misinformation and disinformation emanating from the mouths of British and American politicians and mainstream journalists. Firstly, the Chinese government does not refer to Taiwan as a renegade province. Rather, Beijing refers to Taiwan as a piece of Chinese territory which is pretending to be independent. Secondly, Taiwan is Chinese territory. The population on Taiwan is Chinese. The reason why Taiwan has been separated from China for many years now stems from the Chinese Civil War. So in 1949, the nationalist armies were defeated in the Chinese Civil War by the communist armies. And the leader of the nationalist armies, Chiang Kai-shek, and the remnants of his force fled to Taiwan. And the reason why the communist armies did not pursue him to Taiwan was because the communist armies under Mao Zedong simply did not have the military capabilities at that time to retake Taiwan. And as a consequence, Taiwan has been separated from Beijing since 1949 and indeed is pretending to be independent. And what we see today is a result of Washington and also London using their political, economic, and military influences in Taiwan to try and enclose China in the South China Sea, to try and limit and weaken growing Chinese influence and power in the region, much like how the Americans and the British are attempting to enclose Russia on its western borders by surrounding Russia in that region with NATO member states. And it is certainly the case that the Americans are very troubled by China's growing political, economic, and military power, not just in the South China Sea, but globally as a whole. Therefore, the Americans and the British are increasing their weapons sales to Taiwan as a way of trying to maintain Taiwan's separation from the Chinese mainland. But it is not in the interests of either Beijing or Washington for there to be a war between themselves over Taiwan, because a war between China and America would devastate both countries' economic dependence on one another, in particular their investment with each other. And of course, the Chinese would come off far worse, because the Chinese economic miracle over the last 4 decades is largely based on China's trade and investment relationship with America. But if there was to be a conflict, and I don't believe there will be a conflict, because I don't believe China at this very stage will launch a military operation to retake Taiwan. But if there was a military confrontation between China and America over Taiwan, then quite simply, it wouldn't take much for the American military to leave very little standing of the People's Liberation Army. The American military is by far the predominant military force in the world. And I have long referred to the People's Liberation Army as the largest armed forces museum in the world.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to leave it there. Author and historian Marcus Papadopoulos joining us from Pembrokeshire, UK. Thank you, sir.